Before we get into the video, take a look at these t-shirts. For the gentlemen, there's Papa Squatch. For the ladies, there's Mama Squatch. And for the kids, there's Sasquatch in training. For a limited time, these shirts will be available only on mysteriesofcanada.com for $29 Canadian, or about $21 US. To get a closer look at this rare and elusive apparel, and support this channel in the process, please check out the link in the description. To many British Columbians at the time, the brutal murder of Yao Kum was simply an affirmation of what they had long maintained, that Chinese beliefs and values were so foreign to those held by white Canadians that the Celestials who had streamed into the country to labor in the goldfields and on the railway would never be able to assimilate into Canadian society. Thus, many asserted, Canada should not accept any more Chinese immigrants into the country, and the Chinese who had already settled in Canada should be denied the right to vote. Canada's first Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, had articulated this sentiment in a parliamentary debate in the House of Commons on May 4, 1885, declaring, "Of course we ought to exclude them, because if they came in great numbers and settled on the Pacific coast, they might control the vote of the whole province, and they would send Chinese representatives to sit here, who would represent Chinese eccentricities, Chinese immorality, Asiatic principles altogether opposite to our wishes. If they were allowed in British Columbia, they would swarm over there in large numbers, and we would have an Asiatic population, alien in spirit, alien in feeling, alien in everything. And after they attained formidable proportions in their numbers, you could not keep them out." In an attempt to discourage Chinese immigration, Canadian Parliament passed the Chinese Immigration Act in the summer of 1885, which placed a head tax of $50 on all Chinese immigrants who entered the country, a fee which was increased to $500 in 1903. In spite of this obstacle, Celestials continued to trickle into the Great White North throughout the latter decades of the 19th century and the early decades of the next, finding employment in existing establishments or opening up their own restaurants, laundries, and groceries. Chinese immigration was halted completely in 1923 with the passing of what is known as the Chinese Exclusion Act, which prevented the Chinese from immigrating to Canada entirely. This piece of legislation would remain in place until its repeal in 1947. At least a few of the Chinese immigrants who came to Canada in the late 19th and early 20th centuries are said to still linger in spirit at the sites of their old British Columbian haunts. One such locale is the Chilliwack Museum in the city of Chilliwack, British Columbia, between the Fraser Canyon and Vancouver, which once functioned as the community's town hall. One night back in 1928, so the story goes, a local man named Wilfred Garner was arrested for drunkenness and locked up for the night in a small cell in the town hall basement. As Garner drifted into a stupor, he was joined in captivity by a Chinese immigrant, incarcerated for possession of opium. When the two inmates were left alone, the despairing Chinaman slipped the trouser belt off his sleeping cellmate and used it to strangle himself to death. Years later, Garner's cousin, Samuel Roy Cromarty, was hired as the custodian of the old town hall. Many a lonely night, while he mopped or swept the halls of the historic building, the doors of which he had carefully locked, Cromarty heard inexplicable sounds, like footsteps pacing the floor above him, and the openings and closings of doors. Whenever he investigated these commotions, the janitor confirmed what he already knew, that he was the only person in the building. Cromarty eventually came to believe that the old town hall was haunted, and suspected that its ghostly inhabitant was the spirit of the unfortunate immigrant with whom his cousin had once shared a cell. "I think my little Chinaman is here," he said in an interview for the Chilliwack Historical Archives, his testimony appearing in Joanne Christensen's 1996 book, Ghost Stories of British Columbia. "At least that's my opinion, and I'm gonna stay with it." Another strange story, which Christensen included in her book, takes place in southern Vancouver Island, in a district between Victoria and the municipality of Souk, known as China Flats. Local legend has it that the area was named for a Chinese couple who farmed there for decades in the first half of the 20th century. One night in the early 1940s, the farmer's wife fell gravely ill. The farmer knew that his wife would die without the assistance of a doctor, but since he didn't own a vehicle, he headed up the road on foot, hoping that a passing motorist might take him into town. There wasn't much traffic at that time of night, and the few cars that passed through China Flats flew by the desperate farmer, their occupants being either unwilling to stop for him or unaware of his dire predicament. After several failed attempts to flag down a vehicle, the Chinaman stepped out from the darkness into the headlights of an oncoming truck, praying that this bold action would force the driver to pay him heed. The farmer was struck and died at the scene. This was a compound tragedy, Christensen wrote. When the police officers who investigated the incident went to the farmhouse to deliver the terrible news to the man's wife, they found that she also had died for want of medical attention. Ever since, motorists traveling through China Flats at night have experienced a strange sensation of being joined in their vehicle by an unseen presence desperate to attract their attention. A feeling so strong that some drivers have reported being too afraid to hazard a glance in the rearview mirror. Others have reportedly slammed on their brakes to avoid hitting the dark figure of an Asian man who left the shadows of the ditch to stride out in front of them. When they got out of their car to investigate, they found themselves alone on the highway. Perhaps, Christensen suggested, her husband thinks she is still in need of a doctor and is still trying frantically to find some help. Or perhaps he haunts the road as revenge against the motorists who refuse to stop for him. Whatever the reason, many decades later, the Chinese hitchhiker is still trying to catch a ride. Another of British Columbia's alleged Chinese specters is the frightening phantom of a woman whose story appeared in Robert C. Bellick's 1997 book, Ghosts 2: More True Stories from British Columbia. The source for this tale is John and Janice Bradley, a couple from Vancouver who made a road trip to the city of Kamloops, BC, one evening in the spring of 1975 in order to visit John's brother Dave and his wife Judy. At that time, the convenient Coquihalla Highway had not yet been built, and the only road from Vancouver to Kamloops was a Trans-Canada Highway, which ran through the treacherous Fraser and Thompson canyons, following the route of the Old Caribou Trail. Although there was a chill in the air, Bellick wrote, it was a beautiful night for a romantic moonlit drive. They reached Hope a little before midnight and took the North Fork along Highway 1 that follows the eastern edge of the Fraser Canyon. They had planned to stop for the night at the small town of Spence's Bridge, beyond the edge of the canyon, but in the few motels scattered along the highway, all the lights were out. John and Janice had little choice but to push on to the junction town of Cache Creek, where they were sure a motel room would be available. Sometime after 1 o'clock a.m., the couple approached the lonesome turnoff to Ashcroft, a desert town nestled in an arid bend in the Thompson River, where a handful of derelict shacks leaned drunkenly. Suddenly, a diminutive form rose in the glare of their vehicle's headlights. Standing on the side of the road was what appeared to be a short woman facing in the opposite direction, whose straight black hair whispered of Asian descent. Her outfit was unusual, consisting of dark pants that terminated at her calves, a white blouse with puff sleeves, and a dark vest. Janice was struck by the fact that, despite the chill of the night, the strange figure was not wearing a coat. The woman walked with an unusual gait, taking short, elegant steps with her elbows bent. Suspecting that her car might have broken down, Janice rolled down her window and asked John to slow down so that she could ask the woman if she needed help. Upon being addressed, the woman turned her head in Janice's direction, revealing a hideous countenance on a face as white as porcelain. Terrified, John stepped on the gas just as the figure vanished into thin air. The following day, Bellick wrote, Janice phoned the Ashcroft detachment of the RCMP to inquire if there had been an accident along that section of the highway. Nothing had been reported to the police. Still unsettled, she asked the clerk whether there were any Oriental families living in the area. No, came the reply. Not for some time. Once, though, the woman said, there had been a number of Chinese people living on a few farms, but the old dwellings had long been abandoned and were falling down. They could still be seen beside the highway. British Columbia is not the only Canadian province endowed with strange stories associated with the Chinese-Canadian community. In Edmonton, Alberta, the apparition of a Chinese servant boy clad in a black silk uniform materializes from time to time in a stately old home a few blocks west of the downtown core. He seems to be especially active during garden parties, during which he can blend in with guests. The ladies' washroom of the Bowman Arts Centre in Lethbridge, Alberta is said to be haunted by the ghost of a young Chinese girl, thought to be a tragic remnant of the building's former days as the Bowman School, in which abuse is said to have occurred. In the early 20th century, when anti-Chinese sentiment was rampant in Canada, and the federal head tax made immigration prohibitive, illegal Chinese immigrants and laborers fleeing discrimination are said to have taken refuge in the tunnels beneath Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. Local legend says that this same underground labyrinth was later employed by Chicago gangster Al Capone as a bootlegging base during American Prohibition. And a restaurant in the heart of Toronto, Ontario's Chinatown, which initially served as a Chinese morgue, is said to be home to a host of malevolent spirits, purportedly drawn there by the building's morbid past and particularly bad feng shui. These mysteries surrounding the Chinese-Canadian community are more than mere myths and legends. They are windows into the history of a determined people who overcame natural and social obstacles as they wove themselves into the multicultural tapestry that is Canada. Their historic struggle is perhaps best articulated by historian Lily Chow, who seems to have done more to preserve the story of the Chinese in Canada than the whole of Canadian scholarship, in her 2000 book Chasing Their Dreams. The strength of conviction and perseverance of the Chinese immigrants shines through in the hardships they had to endure. Chinese people often say, "If you break open the silver we earn, you can see drops of blood inside."